coming. If I could just introduce our presentation today is going to be on Kodak and Dyson. Before we start, if I could introduce our team. My name's Johnny.
My name's Lauren.
I'm Matt. How are you?
I'm Shia.
Okay, so if I just run through with you what we're going to talk about today, we're going to start with the factors that affected Kodak's fall and Dyson's rise, and the effect that this had on each of the company's stakeholders. We're then going to look at the historical turning points for both companies before addressing a management lesson that can be learned from studying both Kodak and Dyson. We're then going to wrap this up with the conclusion and open the floor to questions.
So firstly, the stakeholder outcomes. So Kodak was once a giant in the camera and film market. They enjoyed a large share price and a large and loyal workforce. However, being a PLC, a recent downfall has led their share price to plummet, and Kodak staff who are now pensioners are now fearful of pension cuts.
The success of Dyson is directly responsible for the profits gained by investors. It may surprise some of you, but Dyson is actually a private company, so their profits are not reflected by their share price or dividends given to their shareholders, but instead by directors' wages.
We feel that the three main factors that affect the success or downfall of these two companies are their competitors, their management strategies, and their corporate culture. So firstly, Kodak's competitors. Kodak had a competitive advantage for years of being an already established brand and having a majority market share. However, during the 2000s, they started to suffer at the hands of Fujifilm, Sony, Canon, and more recently Apple. The competitors caused them problems for three reasons. The first is that Kodak became slow-moving. Jordan Weissman, in his article, What Killed Kodak, said that Kodak, compared to their competitors, quote, moved slowly. So rather than focusing on entering the digital market first, quote, they focused on the core business of making and selling analog film. The second point is that the digital market became saturated. As a result of Kodak sitting on their technology, Fujifilm started to eat away at the digital market share. And by beating Kodak at price, they began to drive their profit margins lower and lower, as by 2006, digital cameras became affordable and common. Finally, smartphones. In an article by The Telegraph, they said that high-tech smartphones have driven down sales of digital cameras by 29% since 2007. Now this is important because not only did it mean that Kodak were entering a competitive market, but also a shrinking one as well. Because as the rise of smartphones, as my friend over here is using, as the rise of smartphones became more and more popular, the digital market began to shrink, and then the profit margins then got even more lower. Secondly, the management strategies. So as their profit margins and market share were falling, this is a clear indicator that their corporate strategy had to change. Kodak's first attempt was an attempt at diversification. So as film sales were dying, Kodak tried to diversify into other markets, mainly computer hardware and HD printing. They even brought in CEO Antonio Perez from HP in order to bring in some fresh ideas. However, this did little to help, as it only created an identity crisis in Kodak, as they lost their sort of connection with their consumers by, rather than selling cameras, they went to printers. And secondly, they became over-reliant on patents. So their turnaround strategy as their company was going through their downfall was to move into printing, but also an overly aggressive patent legislation. Although Kodak sold many of its patents in 2013 for roughly $525 million, compared to companies such as Fujifilm, who are in exactly the same predicament as Kodak, rather than falling like Kodak did, Fujifilm have begun to survive and thrive in exactly the same business environment. And finally, Kodak had a culture of complacency. So Kodak's success led to complacency. Having enjoyed success for years, Kodak became a prime example of a company that was essentially destroyed by its own corporate culture. Despite the rapid advance of technology usually being blamed for Kodak's downfall, it is clear that complacency was rife throughout the company. Secondly, Kodak suffered from being isolated at their headquarters in Rochester. So a tech journalist by the name of Barry Fox, in a BBC interview, blamed Kodak's isolation as one of the main reasons why the company fell. He said that because Kodak failed to see what the rest of the world were doing, they failed to remain competitive, and even went further on to claim that the managers at Kodak believed that they had, quote, a divine right to sell film, although this was clearly not the case.
In contrast to Kodak, Dyson is an example of a company which we have looked at, which has had strong, steady growth over recent years. I'm going to look at the same three reasons that Matt looked at as to why Kodak failed, compared to why Dyson has succeeded and the profitable effect this has had on their stakeholders. Now, the vacuum cleaner was one of a kind. It was the first bagless cleaner in the market, and this allowed the company to differentiate their product from their competitors. The fact that Dyson had a patent for their bagless vacuum and other designs reduced the risk of new entries into the market, and allowed Dyson to retain market share and retain their customers. And it's this customer loyalty which Dyson is so focuses on. Their priority is developing, testing and analysing their products. This is probably the most expensive part of production.